Hi, my name is Brianna Motzkus and I'm with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net, and today we're going to start our color dance block of the month. So those of you that have watched the first video of getting things together, we are finally ready to start our first block. What's really interesting is, so we do carry the pattern that you will need to sew along with us, so that the designer of the pattern gets the due she deserves. It's a really good pattern if you're brand new to quilting and want to branch out from just basic squares. We're going to cover half square triangles in multiple sizes and the flying geese or the flying goose unit in multiple sizes. So it's those two basic things over and over again, kind of repetition. So by the time you're done with this, you'll be a pro. The really cool thing about doing it a couple times each, or each month is a different size or a different style, is I'm going to also show you different ways to make those blocks that aren't necessarily a traditional way, maybe with a ruler, maybe with not a ruler, just other ways in case one way isn't really working for you. If it's not coming out the right size, if you just can't get it to work for you, maybe the next month that we visit the half square triangles again or the goose units, it might be a way that works better for you. Other thing you need, if you need to do fabrics, so the first video we talked about fabrics, we might have a few kits available left in the shop, or you can get your own fat quarters and backgrounds. So we did have the bold and the shy were the two kits we had available in the store. I think we do have a few shy, and that is the colorway I am doing, so more of a pastel with a gray background, a dark charcoal background. Those of you that have emailed and put in your comments that you really enjoy the bold colorway but you cannot find those kits anywhere, I have a solution for you. So we have these Color Me fat quarters from Anthology Fabrics. They are not batiks, they're just regular cottons, and they are 10 fat quarters. So they are a little short, so you'll have to do some stash hunting or go to your local quilt shop and fill in the blanks. But they're really nice, bright colors. There are a few different textures, which I really like. The original Color Dance textures are all the same. There's no variety in texture, just variety in color. So this is a really good option. If you liked that bright colorway, I would start with this Color Me fat quarter packet and just add a few fat quarters to make the appropriate number of fat quarters you need. And then the background was actually a dark navy, but of course your background can be anything you want. It can be mixed blacks, one solid black, a purple, a fuchsia, whatever you want your background to be, it'll be totally fine. So month one, we're visiting half square triangles. So we're going to need a square up ruler. This is a 6.5 inch Quilter Select square up ruler. We're going to be squaring up most of our half square triangles to anywhere from 3 inches to like 6 inches. But at least for today we need something at least a 4-inch square up ruler or bigger. If you have a big 10-inch one, we can wrangle him around, or this medium size is perfect. You can also use like a 6.5 by 12 or a 6 by 12 inch ruler. It does not have to be square. It just needs to be able to produce a square. We also will use the Expo wet erase marker, and I'll show you, if you've watched any of our videos, you know that we love this ruler, this marker, to mark on our rulers to keep us all straightened out. For today's half square triangles, we're going to use the quick quarter ruler that I really like to making any half square triangles. It makes it really fast and pretty foolproof. And then to go along with our ruler, we need a fabric appropriate marking utensil. So I like the friction marker, where the friction marker goes off with heat. It goes on in a ballpoint ink. We have them in a couple colors here at the shop. And then hit it with your iron and it goes away. You could use a lead pencil if you wanted to. It's kind of going to wash out eventually, but don't use just a regular ink pen. You have the tendency of that is going to bleed or not come off at all, or have a little, if you have a pen that has a little blop that starts, more likely you're going to see that. So fabric appropriate marking utensil to make our half square triangles, and let's get started. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with just some basic cutting tips for you. So if you're a novice quilter, this might be helpful. If you struggle with cutting, this might be helpful. Or maybe you just want to fast forward because you can cut and you're good to go. So you have your big chunk of background. So maybe a 4-yard chunk, maybe you're doing scraps, maybe you're trying to use some from stash. This is your basic cutting. You can of course do it the way it comes off the bolt at the quilt store, which is your 2 pieces folded. There's a fold at the bottom. Take your ruler and cut across. The most important part is making sure that your fold line is lined up. I prefer to line everything up on my ruler instead of my mat, because sometimes my mat can be distorted if it sat in a hot car for just a little too long. Maybe not enough time to warp it, but your lines can do funny things. So the most important thing is to make sure that a line on your ruler is lined up with your folded edge so you can make a nice true line. So today I'm actually going to fold mine in half because my mat itself is not even 24 inches wide, so I wouldn't be able to cut the whole length of my fabric. So I'm going to fold it in half. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my ruler. Now again, you can use your 6x12 ruler, your 6x24, whatever you need, but at the moment what I have back here that will work is my 12.5 inch square ruler. And it all works, it all has the same measurements. So of our background, we're going to cut our background squares out. 1, 2, 3, it's going to be a 4-inch strip. And again, I'm just lining up a line on my fold here, making sure that my 4-inch all the way down is going to square up my edge. So essentially when I cut off any raw edges, fray bits, anything that's going to go on, and make sure we cut all the way past the selvage. And if you are someone who quilts fairly regularly, it might be a good idea, since we're starting a new project, to change our rotary blade in our rotary cutters and also the needle in our sewing machine. They are the most neglected things of sewing, are those notions that we use the most. We tend to usually use them until they no longer cut or they might break. So be sure to do that before we start sewing on. So again, I'm going to line up my straight line on my fold here, and then my 4-inch mark is going to go on that nice clean cut edge I just made, and then I'm going to cut a nice straight clean edge, and this is all waste. And then we'll cut these into squares. And again, you can cut with the fold already happening, just like we got it from your quilt store, or you can do one layer at a time. There is no wrong or right way. It is whatever you are most comfortable with. I'm going to switch to my little guy just because of space here. And again, I'm going to line up on my clean cut edges. I'm going to measure over. I'm going to start this way. Because watch, when you have a 6.5 or an 8.5 or a 1/2 inch increment ruler, keep in mind that one of these edges is a 1/2. So be aware of those if you're cutting it for just regular blocks. Otherwise, your measurements will be off. So lining up my cut edges. Twist this one. Line up all 3 nice straight edges and cut off my selvage. You don't want to use any bit of the selvage. What the salvage's purpose is for mounting the gray good. The gray good is just the white, ready for printing material that is stuck to some boards that are printed through. So if you have little holes in your selvage, those are never coming out. No matter how much you wash. This little fray stuff, I mean, you can cut that off, I guess, if you wanted to, but you really do want to get everything just a little bit past and make sure it's just all color. Otherwise, you'll always see this little bit of selvage in your quilt, or the text that might be on your selvage. And then this is waste. So we're going to cut our squares. We need, for today's class, we need 12 background squares, and then we also need 5 different fat quarters. So you will notice in your pattern there is a color chart. The color chart is really, really handy. So you've got the bold color chart if you have the bold kit from us, or you have the shy color chart if you have the shy kit from us. What's really nice is the images are actually pretty accurate to the fabric that they are requesting. So you'll see on your pattern, if you have the bold kit, you're going to need at least a 1/2 yard of your background for this block, plus a fat quarters of these 5 colors. They also let you know that this one is RO, PV, which represents colors on your color chart. Same thing for the Shy colorway, which is the one I'm doing. We'll have those colors so that you can really consider who is KZ, who is whatever. Now, what I want to tell you is don't get stuck on this. If this creates more stress, more heartache, more confusion for you than it does, don't worry about it. What she is doing by color numbering all of these is making sure that as you are making your quilt, that your colors are dispersed throughout your entire quilt to make sure that you're having 4 half square triangles that are in this pale pink color, and you've got 3 that are in a tan color. So she has just separated it to hopefully make your life easier. If it does not make your life easier, do not worry about it. Do whatever you want. You can use her colors for reference and use a gray, a pink, a green, a gold, and maybe a tanny color. Just use those for reference. If you're not going to keep track of your own colors this way, whatever makes you happy is what I want you to do. Don't get stressed on the colors and, well, what is the FK? I can't figure it out. Just pick a green. It's all good. Your quilt will still look awesome. Even if you get the colors, pick the wrong one, it doesn't matter. Your quilt will still look fantastic. So we are cutting 12 background squares. We are going to choose our 5 fat quarters to make our blocks today, and these happen to be my 5, and we're going to cut it looks like we are going to be cutting 2 4-inch squares out of 4 colors and 4 4-inch squares out of another color. And again, follow your instructions and you'll see why. She is saying that you can cut some extra squares to reserve for the next month. You can absolutely do that if you want to, or if you're doing it scrappy, do it however you would like to. The other thing I should mention is that as you are sewing along, have a little tote or a bin or a project pouch available for your project. So when you're done cutting your background, you can put your background in here, have it ready to go for the next month. You can have your even extra strips in here and your fat quarters as you're cutting 4-inch strips or 2.5-inch strips or whatever you're cutting out of your fat quarters. You can have all of the pieces in one place so that you don't have to go hunting for your scraps if you're wanting to use as much of these fat quarters as you can. So I'm going to keep cutting some squares and then we'll be right back and we'll start making our half square triangles. So if you read through your pattern, you read some of the helpful tips on the back of the front page. Maybe. Yes, the helpful tips. So this is the cover of your pattern. Flip it over. She talks about some things. These are some good bullet points that you should know. Some of it is read the instructions before you start going, in case you have any questions before you start. But I think the very best bullet is bullet point number 3, where she says when you're cutting your fat quarters, cut along the 21-inch side. So when you have a fat quarter, your fat quarters measure 18 by 21. So if you're opening up your fat quarter, where you see salvage, that is always going to be the 18-inch side, and then the length is going to be the 21. So she is saying to cut across the 21-inch side, which means you're going to cut this way, so that we're cutting a 4-inch strip, a 3-inch strip, whatever, so we go. So that is the most efficient way to cut your fat quarter up, to make sure you use as much and has as little waste as possible. If you make a mistake and cut the other direction, don't worry, don't recut it. Your fabric will lay just fine. It's not about the weave of your fabric, it's just about efficiency. So you'll notice that's how we're going to be cutting, is with the across the 21-inch side. Okay, so I have all my squares cut, my background squares, my colored squares, and now we're going to do right sides together, and we're going to mark our lines. So we're going to take the quick quarter ruler, and you'll see there's a little slice right in the middle of that ruler. That is our guide. And so we're going to just make sure that the diagonal of our block goes through our ruler here. So we have the point of my squares here and the point here, and then we're going to take my friction marker and I'm going to draw in between. And that gives me this perfect dotted line that is from point to point. I'm going to put a few pins in here. And then I'm going to do this to all of my blocks. Is take a background square, take a colored square, right sides together, grab my ruler, place it on top, make sure that the point is here, point down there, hold it down, and draw my line. The other really nice thing about the friction marker is it fits beautifully inside this tiny little sliver of a cut. And then you're ready. So we're gonna do this to all of our background squares and color squares. And then we're gonna go to the sewing machine. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna put on our 1/4" foot. Let me get mine here off for you. So here's my 1/4" foot. Ours for my FOF machine has a little guide on, a little flange. You do not have to have that on if you don't want to. It's whatever works easiest for you. And then as we are sewing, we're going to put our little flange or the edge of our 1/4" foot right on that line we've sewn. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch on down one side, turn it around, and then we're going to go sew down the other side of this one. So we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to do sew 1/4 inch on either side of that line we just drew, and then we'll be right back. So I did some sewing and I did my seam on 1/4 inch from that center line I drew. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cut them apart. You can of course cut them apart with a pair of scissors if you'd like to, or with a rotary cutter and a ruler. We're going to cut these triangles apart right on the line that we drew. So once we cut them apart, we're then going to go ahead and we're going to hit them with the iron because we are going to trim them down. So as you are sewing, if you got a little squirrely or maybe it wasn't an exact 1/4 inch because it was, you know, I don't know, it was just one of those days. And it's totally fine because what we're going to do is we're going to press these open and we're actually going to trim this block down. So when we're pressing, I like to set my seam, which is just hit it with an iron real fast as it's closed, and then I press everything to the dark. And in my case, my dark is my background. And I'm just going to kind of take my heavy, and I like a heavy iron, and I'm going to just rock that piece right over so I have a nice, clean, crisp edge right there. And the clean, crisp edge is very important. We want to make sure everything's nice and crisp. If you want to use some best press to make sure that's nice and stiff, you can absolutely do that at this case. But what is really important is to make sure that seam gets opened all the way. If it does not, we will, you know, let's just say we're just going to press that open, and no, oh, that looks pretty straight to me. What happens when we start to trim, we could trim it just fine that way, but you're going to have this little flip. Can you guys see that little pucker that would form if we were to sew that way? It'll also, if we're pressing, we're getting ready to trim and we're kind of pushing it open, we're no longer square anymore. We're gonna have to repress that crease out of there. So it's important to make sure you have that all the way open. Not enough to distort our block. We don't wanna manhandle it by any means, but we do want that nice, clean, and we want it all the way open. Okay. So we're going to keep pressing, and then let's go ahead and let's get straight to trimming. Now usually what I like to do is I like to do every step at the same time. So I'm going to sew all of my half square units together, I'm going to press them all open, and then I'm going to take them all over to my cutting mat and trim. So we're going to be trimming these blocks to, it looks like a 3.5 inch square. So when we're using our square up ruler, again, be cautious if there's a 1/2 inch mark, because again, it will make your count a little different. But you'll notice on your ruler there is a line, a diagonal dotted line that runs across your ruler. Now, even if you have a 6 by 12, you still have a diagonal line that comes off one of your points that says 45 degrees on it. And that line is going to be key because we're going to put that line right inside the crease where our seam is that we've just pressed open. So we're going to lay that down there, and then comes the wet erase expo marker. It wants to be wet erase instead of dry erase, because of course with dry erase we could just rub our hand across it and the mark is gone. We can run our fabric over it and the mark is gone. The nice thing about the wet erase is it has to be wet. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna mark our little lines. So I like to mark my diagonal line just to give me reference. Hey, this is where your line's at. And then we're gonna go over 1, 2, 3 and a half. Gonna go down a 3 and a half. 1, 2, 3 and a half. I like to do my little intersection there, my little diagonal line, and 3 and a half down here. You can even go as far as putting a diagonal line there. And then you always have that little reference mark that you're always gonna make sure you find all your marks when you start to trim. It'll also ensure that you don't flip your ruler and start counting from the 1/2 inch side. It's just a really nice reminder of what we're doing because we're trimming a lot of blocks at once. It's not just once and done. And the accuracy of cutting is almost more important than sewing a straight seam. So if you look at these, so if you follow our lines, we are trimming nothing. Super, super tiny, tiny a bit of amount. Now, if you find that all of yours are just wonky, they're not, you know, doing what they're supposed to be doing and you're super discouraged, don't be discouraged. Trim it to whatever size you can get to. If you can get to 3 1/4 on every single one, trim them to a 3 1/4 inch square. I will show you how to fix that. When you are looking at your blocks, she says from your background to cut these 1 1/2 by 6 1/2 or these 1 1/2 by 8 1/2 inch rectangles. What that is for is she's going to put this little border around all of these half square triangles. And that is how you can fix this block. So this block is going to finish all said and done at 8 1/2 inches square. So if that just means we need to cut these 3 inches wide and then trim down to 8 1/2, that's super easy. That's super slick. So don't get super discouraged. The other thing you can do, go ahead and cut a 4 inch square of your background, a 4 inch square is your color. Make a little bonus block. Just see, make sure you can do it if it's effective for you. If you find that there is not enough room for you to trim up this size, instead of doing a 4 inch square, go to a 5 inch square. You will have more to trim, so you have a nice, perfect half square triangle when you get to the trimming stage. So we are going to line up our center line on that beautifully pressed line we just did, and we're just gonna trim off this little bit of fuzz, top and bottom. Move those out of the way. See, that's nothing that we're taking off. And then we're gonna take our corner and we're gonna flip it. Same thing, use our marks we put in there. And I start by lining up that diagonal line, pushing it up into the 3 1/2 inch mark. So I've got this line straight, this 3 1/2, 3 1/2, and trim. Now, my only suggestion, if you're gonna change anything up, you can make a note on your pattern if you want to, but you need to do everything to all of them. If you do it to one, do it to all. All right, that's one block, all nice and trimmed. I'll show you one more time. So again, use our ruler, line up our diagonal line. There's our 3 inch mark, our 3 inch mark. And I'm in a little ways. Can you see that I'm trying to get rid of some of all that little fuzzy stuff? The main idea of our trimming up is to make sure everything nice and square. So I'm going to take off a little bit off of every side, or a lot, depending on what square you might have started with. And if you find that this is a daunting task, or maybe it doesn't come out as great as you thought it was, we're going to do half square triangles again, maybe in just a different way, in a larger size. There's another one. Let me show you another quick little trick. If you find that you hate picking your block up and then moving it, or even if you're cutting your squares and you don't like to pick up that piece, move it, and then cut your 4 inch square, use a smaller rotary cutting mat on top of another mat or on top of your table. Because what it turns into is a rotating mat without spending the money for a rotating mat. So again, I'm going to trim one more for you, and then I'll let you guys do yours. We're going to do the same thing, line up our center line, 3 inches, 3 inches, excuse me, 3 1/2 inches, 3 1/2 inches. I've done those little bits. I'm going to take my ruler off. I'm just going to spin this mat the other direction and then put my ruler back down. Take my diagonal line, 3.5, 3.5, and cut. And there you go. You have your perfect trimmed block. And what's really nice, if you're having trouble with any ruler slippage as you're trimming, as you're cutting, make sure you have a ruler that has a coating on the back. So Quilter Select is our favorite. It's created by Alexanderson, and it has a true non-stick on the back, where if you have your fabric on it, it does not move. Your fabric will move on your mat, but your ruler will not slide off your mat. So for example, that was right side down. I'm going to flip my ruler upside down. See how it just slides wherever it wants to? Brush with one little finger. It will move the fabric, actually the fabric, without moving the ruler from your fabric. So quality ruler, nice sharp blade, it all makes a difference. So once we have everybody all trimmed up, I have one more. I'm going to trim my last one, and then I'm going to show you how to make your really cool pinwheel block. Okay, so we now have all of our half square triangles beautifully pressed, beautifully trimmed to whatever size. Again, if they're a tad bit smaller, don't fret. Just make sure if you did trimmed one differently, they are all the same, whatever that means to you. All right, and then we're going to take 4 of a kind. So we are, of course, making a couple different colors of pinwheels. So you'll have 5 different colorways, and one colorway you're going to make 2 of the same color. In my case, it's going to be this pale pink, and yours it might be something different. So we're going to take these 4 and we're going to create this into a spinning pinwheel. Let's see. There we go. So there is our pinwheel. Whether you're wanting it to spin towards the background or spin with your color, it's still spinning, which is the important part. And then we're going to go ahead and sew this block together. So we're going to start here. We're going to do right sides together. And we're going to start here and sew to the point. What's really important is you can nestle this seam. So you see how we have alternating, our blacks are on different sides. And since we pressed everything to the dark, these will just nestle together. They'll interlock so we have a perfect point at the end of it. So we're going to go ahead and sew from here to here and do the same thing on this block. Make sure we lock those points together and sew from here to here. Okay, so we've sewn our 2 pieces together, so we have 2 little rectangles now. I would say give this a little press, and again, press to the dark. So in this case, I'm going to press that way, and this one I'm going to press that way. And I think when you are starting out on a new quilting journey, if this is something new for you, if you are a new piecer, I think pressing at every stage is helpful. You really don't have to get distorted by wrinkly fabric, things that don't line up right, a weird pucker. So pressing at every stage I think is helpful in the learning process. So you will see here we have that perfect 1/4 inch ready to go, so we can have a perfect point where our pinwheel meets. So the trick is when we are pressing to the dark, right sides together, everything is going to interlock because you see how they're separated? It's the same way as before. Those will nestle those seams. And when you are sewing, you will see, I'm going to mark this with my friction marker so you guys can see it better. But when you are seeing, you have a seam. This, of course, sewed our 2 half square triangles together. This sewed our first half square triangle unit. That's our diagonal line. Okay, you see that there? So right here, from our raw edge to that little intersection to right there is our 1/4 inch. Now if we're sewing, we get crazy and we don't have a perfect 1/4 inch on our machine, get distracted by the dog, whatever happens, and we sew over that line. If we sew up here, you're going to lose that point because your point is going to point here. You're going to have a dull pinwheel right there. So we don't want to do that. Now if you go a little bit below, if again, get distracted, do whatever, you're still going to have a point, but you're just going to have something that looks a little different. You can go back and sew up a little closer if you want to, but that is that intersection you kind of want to watch for. And that will help you gauge for those perfect points every single time. So I'm going to sew mine real fast, and then I will show you what it looks like. Alright, so I went ahead and I sewed my seam, and you might not be able to see on here, but where my big black line is, my stitch is actually just below that line. And that's where my 1/4 inch landed, which is perfect because when we open this bad boy up, that is a perfect point in there. All 4 of those points are beautiful and pointy. Now, if they're a little blunted where they're not all pointy, it does not matter. Thelma used to always tell me that if she could not see it galloping by on a horse, it didn't matter. Don't rip it out. We are all learning. So if it looks like really bad to you and it drives you crazy, you can fix it. But if it's just a little off here, a little off there, don't fix it. Let it be, because the chances of someone, when your quilt is all finishing, picking out that center of that pinwheel is slim to none. They're not going to care. So at this stage, we can press this nice and flat. I do tend to use my little best press spray and make it nice and starchy, because again, we won't be touching this block again until we're putting our whole quilt together. So we want to make sure it stays nice and flat inside of our box. Now the last step to this pinwheel is that little border going on right here. So she of course says to cut it 1.5 inches and make your border to make a block that finishes at 8.5 inches square. Now my biggest tip to you is to cut, instead of doing a 1.5 inch strip, at least do a 2 inch strip, and that gives you a little bit of cush if you need to fix anything. If your block, your half square triangles were trimmed just a tiny bit smaller so you can actually make them nice and square, that gives you that ability. So I would not cut these. I know she tells you to cut it the first thing on the top, but don't cut those until you're ready, to make sure you really do have a block that is 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. If it is a little bit smaller, heck, even a little bit bigger, but if it's a little bit smaller, if you have a 5 3/4 inch block by 5 3/4, cut that strip 2 inches. And then we can always trim down this block to 8.5 inches later. And then nobody has to know we had to make a little alteration because we sewed a little different than everybody else. And if you're worried, well, I got a kit, I have 4 yards of fabric, I already bought everything. Upping that strip 1/2 inch, you are not going to run out of fabric. So don't worry that if you think, oh, that's a really good tip, thanks for telling me, and you cut these 2.5 inches instead of the 1.5 inches that it's calling for in your pattern, you will not run out of background fabric. So, because all of her little borders around things is actually her background. If you go ahead and look at the original pattern, you'll see, like, here's the pinwheels we just made. You see how they look like they're kind of floating in here? That's because that little border strip we're putting on right here is your background. So up that. Instead of doing 1.5 inches, do 2 inches. And you'll see at the end of the day, you'll be happy you did. Alright, so here's my first pinwheel. I'm going to keep sewing my pinwheels together, and I am doing the 2.5 inch, or excuse me, the 2 inch strip. And keep in mind at the bottom of your pattern here, it tells you your last step. I think on every single pattern, we'll see, I'll point them out every time we go, but your blocks after adding your background strips should measure 8.5 by 8.5. And you can trim this block up the exact same way we trimmed up our half square triangles. So that even if you want some little extra, we'll trim this up. You can trim this up now when you're sewing. Again, trim every block exactly the same. And then you'll be ready for when we sew it together. So I'm doing 2 inches just in case I get a little crazy, or I have my helping cat who likes to help me sew and she's not helpful. So keep making your blocks, and then we'll see you in 2 weeks and we'll do our next lesson. Our next lesson is, again, it's a kind of a twofer. It's a little more in depth. We're going to be doing some smaller half square triangles. We're going to be working on some of these little clusters over here. And then we're also going to do our Jacob's ladder block, which is just squares and strips. So go ahead and get these. I think we have 6 pinwheels to make, and then we'll see you in a few weeks and we'll get started on block number 2.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.